In this episode, we're going to talk a lot about forgiveness and vulnerability within community. And although we're going to be talking about this in the church, we're also going to talk about how this is one of the keys to success in groups like the Tony Robbins Company and any other business organization out there. Listen, if you want to be an eagle, if you're going to have to fly with people that are like eagles, and we're going to talk about the insecurities that everyone faces trying to get into those types of relationships, the risks you're going to take. And yeah, you might get hurt, but it's still worth it. And so this is such a great episode. I'm really looking forward to you guys hearing my friend Cole Zick. Hey, this is the Money Hole Podcast. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. Today, I'm here with my friend Cole Zick. What's up, man?
What's going on, Lambo?
Well, I wasn't in Hawaii last week like you, but...
I was in Maui. With my wife.
Yep. Did you guys see Lahaina at all?
We did actually. They just opened it like 2 days before we got there. Now, you could only drive by on the highway. You couldn't stop. Being from Redding, it probably has even a different feel because we know what that's like a bit. We didn't lose our whole city, but a portion of it. Yeah. So yeah, it was kind of wild. It was crazy.
Yeah. I have a bunch of friends that live there, and the day that it was happening, they sent me some videos, and I was just like, oh, it's a brush fire. But when that happened, I was like,
yeah, it was
wow.
nuts.
And it was sad, man, because I'm Hawaiian. I got family from Hawaii, and then I have, ever since I got married, we always went to Lahaina, the banyan tree. So we have so many photos that are so important to us. And then a bunch of my friends lost a ton of homes down there.
It's wild.
Horrible situation, man. But
it is.
They'll recover.
Yeah.
They're already working on doing some crazy stuff down there. In fact, I had Dan Ferreira on a podcast recently who is talking with Maui about using some of their building homes off-site and shipping them, and they're custom houses. So
that's amazing.
They're looking at some really creative stuff. That's
incredible
to try to bounce back. So
yeah, it was awesome. We just kind of relaxed and we actually did a lot of driving around the island.
Did you?
Fun. Yeah.
You guys go up to the upcountry?
We did.
Nice.
Went to the upcountry, the down country.
There's no down country.
We went around the country. We went around it.
So Cole, we first met in Wyoming, I think, right?
I think so.
Okay.
I heard about you because you're very infamous before that trip, but that was when I met you.
You heard about me. That makes me feel important.
No, it wasn't good things.
Oh.
I'm just joking. They were great things.
I had heard about you too, but I didn't actually know much about you. So when you showed up, my first experience with you was this super fun, goofy jokester who literally fit right in to this groups of jokesters. And it wasn't until after that Jason told me, oh man, he's an amazing preacher. He's a pastor. And then I kind of had blanks filled in as time went on, but I'm so glad that I got to meet you at Wyoming because that anchored like who you are. It was a cool trip. It was so fun, man.
Yeah, it was awesome, man.
Yeah.
Once in a lifetime.
I feel that way. Yeah. It just set up so much momentum for so many things that I see happening with people right now and in their marriages. And so we talk a lot about really everything here, but I thought it'd be fun to have you on to talk a little bit about the church and money. We have a lot of people who aren't necessarily religious that listen to this, but we have tons of Christians and different people. But a lot of the people that have been raised in the church, and I don't know how far back your church life went, you guys identify for sure with this idea that we have these funky belief systems about what it means to have money or to try to create passive income. And, I've met pastors who are like, money's the root of all evil. And then I've met pastors that, swear that money's the solution to all problems. So tell me a little bit about your story.
Yeah, I was raised in the church, raised in a Christian home. I think for sure grew up more along the money's the root of all evil is how I was raised, which is a little bit ironic because my dad has money. He's built a pretty successful business of his own. He hasn't had a mortgage payment, he owns multiple properties and hasn't had a mortgage payment in probably 2 decades.
If he needs one.
He will not. Yeah. He's not your ideal customer.
8% right now.
Yeah. He's, so it's kind of funny because I grew up in the church. I always knew I wanted to be a pastor since I was like 4 or 5 years old.
Wow.
And I don't remember when this came in, but at some point in my childhood, I had adopted this idea that meant I was going to drive a car that could barely drive, live in a house or an apartment that you could barely live in, and eat ramen noodles and peanut butter and jelly and call it ministry, and that was holy, and it was, valiant, and it would be honorable.
Bumping into other pastors at the thrift store.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So when I got married to Caitlin, my wife, who had a completely different, completely opposite experience and mindset and belief. And, it took me a lot of time to actually shift my belief, my relationship with money, the ideas that I had surrounding it. It took a lot of years for that to begin to shift because of the way I had pictured my future. Mm-hmm. And, so I think, my relationship with money has been up and down. I would say the last 5 to 6 years has been much better.
What made it shift?
Probably, to be quite honest, my wife and I are pastors at a church now in Reading, as you know, but before that, we spent 6 years in a role at Moral Revolution that's connected to Bethel. Mm-hmm. For those that don't know, it's a church in Reading, where the town that Chris and I live in, and probably the time there, getting to see people that were Christians, that were pastors, that weren't poor and broke and living off of paycheck to paycheck, and yet we're holy and humble and generous and loved it was it was a huge paradigm shift for me. Mm-hmm. Big book was Poverty, Riches, and Wealth.
That's such a good
Chris Valadin wrote it, and
so good, man.
Reading that book was huge for me. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's been progressive. It's been being around people that thought different.
Yep.
That's probably the number one thing, even above the book, is just being around people that have a different outlook on money and aren't scared of it, aren't scared of being broke, aren't scared of having wealth ruining them, and who truly love the Lord. And yet still, because that was the thing for me, for those that aren't a Christian, just to give a little context, it was almost as if you were scared of money because you thought it was going to ruin you. Mm-hmm. And if you had it, surely you can't have it and have character and integrity and be a good person and still be humble. Mm-hmm. And so it took being around different people to change that.
Yeah, I don't think that's limited to people in the church. I mean, I remember at some point I heard this, I don't even know who said it, but they're like, it's statistically proven anyone who's made $1 million, there was fraud somewhere, or it was unethical.
Yeah.
And there's just so many of these things that are thrown around there, and then no one really teaches this stuff well. It runs to extremes. So I think it kind of has to be an evolution for all of us.
Yeah.
We have to individually really kind of look at our life and what we want, and look at the lives of others and measure the fruit.
Yep.
And you sort of kind of create your own ideal, you know, and hopefully it's one where the last guy I had on here, I mean, this guy is the opposite of someone who's motivated by anything material at all. Mm-hmm. And he started buying rental properties, in his 20s when he was single. And he did it because he's now creating like feature films and documentaries that are, I think his next one will be on Netflix.
Yeah.
But he knew that he would never be able to get out of the day-to-day creating a bunch of goofy commercials for stuff that he wasn't necessarily passionate about, unless he created some sort of other vertical of income, so that he could have the freedom to start going after some things and taking some risks.
Yep.
Calculated risks.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good for him. I'm glad that he did that.
Yeah, no, he's incredible. Tyler Ferris. I don't know if you heard of him, but
yeah.
So you came to Reading. You started being exposed to different ways of thinking and living, and then how did you end up, at Risen King? Tell us a little bit about that story.
Yeah. So we felt, my wife and I have both felt equally called to ministry. Like my wife preaches and teaches and stuff as well. Mm-hmm. And we knew, we were pastoring in a true pastoral context when we were in Sacramento. That's just where we came from. And the role that we had here at first was more itinerant. We were traveling and speaking and, creating online content, things like that. Yeah. But we knew from the beginning, like, hey, this is probably going to be a short season. We're going to be back into a local church. And so we, after we'd been there for about 4.5 years, we started to feel this, the best way I could say it is like we couldn't be satisfied doing what we were doing any longer, no matter how great it was or how good the moment was or how well a new course went or how great a weekend went when we were traveling and speaking. Like none of it would satisfy our itch. And all we could think about was being in a local church context again. And so long story short, over about a year period, we, started to check out a bunch of different things and different options and different churches and went down different paths and ended up, we love Redding. We fell in love with Redding after a couple years and felt like, man, we don't actually, if God will let us have anything to do with it, we don't want to leave. So this door opened at Risen King. It was a church that money has really been the primary narrative for a long time there. They were, the church was in a really rough place, had gotten into an excessive amount of debt. The attendance had dropped. The debt actually flatlined to increased over years. Like it just, they couldn't get out from under it. And we felt pretty called to it. Felt like we had a lot of faith to help solve some of the pretty big problems. And so we've been in it for 3 months now.
Yeah. I was talking with a guy in Colorado who's involved in a bunch of ministries a few years ago. And I was talking about some pastor friends of mine and he was like, that's really cool that they're bivocational pastors. And at the time I was kind of like, how does that work? And he was like, think about it, man. He's like, so many pastors are held hostage by the tithe. He's like, and if someone as a pastor can create a life where they make money outside of the church, how much more freedom do they have to truly lead people, even if it's not what's popular and it's offensive, which is oftentimes what I need. I don't need people to tell me
you do need
right.
offended. I love offending you personally. It's one of my, it's hard to do.
It's my love language.
It's fun to do.
Yeah. It's my love language. So one of the things you said, man, I want you to touch on is, why was it important for you to get into a community and to a church? Like you said that was something you guys really felt was important to you. What was important about that?
I think for Caitlin and I, we've gained, our lives have been enriched because we've always been pretty blessed with close friends, people that. Which
is kind of weird when people meet you.
It is. You wouldn't think I'd be likable, but after the second or third interaction, I really break people down, and they're like, oh, I guess I got to put up with this guy, and I can't point to why I don't like him. So I guess you
just don't leave.
Yeah, exactly. I never go away. But we've been really enriched by deep relationships, and it's something that for whatever reason, even though we're relational creatures, people don't do very well. And churches in particular don't do it very well. And I've seen a lot of people in churches more hurt by relationship than they have been helped by it. And I think for us, we feel very grateful because of the experiences and the relationships we've had. Even the churches we've been at some phenomenal churches that have done really well in ministry, done really well in relationship, and felt like we were more called to a place that, isn't necessarily the obvious draw for somebody that is got a strength in ministry, but to a place that needed fixed and addressed and things done. And so, I think for us, the big draw is relationship for sure. The idea of building a church that's really built on community, not on a stage ministry, not on a conference culture, not on none of those things are bad. Like there's churches that's their calling. We didn't feel called to that. We felt called to coffee and lunch and dinner and small retreats with our church and being there for somebody when they're going through things. And just the role that we were in before didn't allow for really any of that.
Yeah, man. Community is such a powerful thing. I wonder, you mentioned all those other, expressions of not even just churches, but movements. And I've gone to so many conferences. I've gone to a couple Christian conferences, but lots of business ones. And I'll tell you, like outside of the church world, for people that are trying to excel in business or finance or anything like that, the moment that they surround themselves and do life with people that are going in the direction they want to go is the moment everything changes.
Well, and it's funny because we almost are hypocritical in our own, what we say we want. So like in the church world, it's, you only get respect in a sense if you have a huge, massive church, right? Like it's like how big,
like as a pastor?
Yeah. Okay. Like how big's your church? Oh, that's amazing. And yet, what are the things that you can charge the most for? The smallest contexts. Okay. So in the business world, when we were in Hawaii, it just so happened that Tony Robbins had this thing going on at our hotel the week that we were there. And
so you obviously weren't staying at Motel 8.
We were not staying at the Motel 8. No, we did not stay. We stayed at the Grand Wailea.
Oh, I love the Grand Wailea.
It was amazing.
It's nice.
And so, it's so intriguing. You think of Tony Robbins, you think of stadium.
Yeah.
Right.
Or walking on hot coals, because I've done it. Yeah.
Or walking on hot coals. But what was going on there was this platinum membership.
Yeah.
Where people paid $85,000 a year to get to be in a small circle with Tony Robbins.
Yep.
And so it's this thing inside of us that whether we realize it or not, we may be drawn to something because of the glitz and the glam, but we almost always end up with this desire to get smaller again.
Yeah.
Because of this hunger and this desire for connection, for eye contact, to be known.
Yeah.
That you would know what's going on in my life, and that when I see you, you would say, "Hey, how's it going at your new church?" Like that depth of connection, I think every human heart is hungry for.
Yeah.
And we get lost sometimes in the big, when every industry, every business model, it doesn't matter whether it's church, whether it's Tony Robbins, everything ultimately ends up about being small again, because as much as we can get lost in the big, our heart wants that.
Yep. Yeah. And you see it everywhere. I mean, there's surveys done that measure people's motivation to be working at certain places. Yep. Making money is generally 3 on the list.
Right.
The number one thing is that I like the place I work, which usually is around, I like to be around people that I'm working with. We saw that during the pandemic. Like working remotely was really, it caused a lot of problems for people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's so many people that are so happy to be back in a work environment.
Businesses are still trying to recover from.
They are, man. But I think we learned something really useful. Like working remotely is a great option for some people in some industries, but a lot of people do better when they're in a tribe.
Oh, yeah. Group thinking, that, being built up and encouraged and challenged. I don't know how you get better without individual sharpening you. Sure, podcasts and books, but there's nothing that makes you better like the person next to you.
No, for sure. It was funny. I don't go to Bethel. I'm a part of a small church plant. But obviously I run with a bunch of different people from all over, but we have our Brave Co group, right?
Yep.
And a lot of them, the guys that you run with too. And, I have these people that, go to churches all the time that always tell me like how hard it is to find community. And I know there's some truth to that. I do. But I was telling my wife the other night, I was like, man, I think it can be hard, but I also think that sometimes people use that as an excuse. I've been a part of a small church most of my life as a Christian. And one of the benefits and, the disadvantages is that if you show up on a Sunday to a small church, you're not going to be able to hide that you and your wife had a fight on the way there.
Totally.
And then you realize, I don't have to hide that.
Yeah.
And then you realize it's valuable if they know that.
Yeah.
And
good,
so
man.
that a lot of times that's hard to do in these really big settings. And I think people just, they realize that the risk of being known is scary, but man, it's transformational.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, we've always been at big churches. This is the first time, we've never been at a church under 4,000.
It's a big church.
Yeah. I mean, it's growing up, even my childhood.
Wow.
Like since I was raised in a church of like 6,000 people.
That was the Rock or what was
No,
it called?
I grew up in Michigan.
Oh, okay.
But like even our sanctuary in Michigan, our sanctuary seated 5,000 people.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it was crazy. And that's what you're saying is one of the things that I actually push back on with people, because it's easy to blame a big church for not being relational.
Totally.
Which I think is an absolute cop out.
Yeah, it is.
Because relationship is not built from a stage and a pastor that tells you to build relationship. Relationship is built by me taking a relational risk.
Yep.
And whether it's a small church or a big church, I'm the ultimate one that decides who I am when I show up. No one else decides that for me.
Yep.
Even though it was a small church, you still have to decide to show up in a vulnerable way with the people that are in your church.
Yep.
It's no bigger risk for you than it is a person in a large church. And so that's one of the things I've always felt not frustrated about, that I push back on people, is you don't get to blame your group size for the lack of relational connection, because you take personal responsibility for your connection. You don't get to blame the group size that you're in.
Totally. No, I can't agree more. And again, that's true for every context.
Yep.
You know, you're sharing this. I'm thinking when I joined the Core, which is a coaching group I now coach for, and this is true for me, and I just had a guy on the podcast who is a part of our group too. When we show up and we're broke and our businesses are all a mess and our marriages are a mess, we show up at these events and there's 500 people in the room who are multimillionaires wearing suits and everyone looks great. And you show up to these little cocktail tables and you feel so insecure. You're just like, I hope someone comes up and talks to me. Now, obviously, you know, if you have any social skills, you can fight through that and start some conversations. But, you know, being on this side 12 years into this group and now going to those events and looking for those people, I always tell people, you know, when we come to these conferences, the most valuable thing you're going to get here is the people that are a part of the community. Yep. I was like, you're going to hear some great things from the stage. Don't get me wrong. I said, but the things that have changed my life the most are the people in other markets who I found that we had these connection points and these values that were in alignment. And then I found out they're doing these really outside the box things to create wealth that I had no idea could happen. And because we made a connection, they gave up time to jump on a Zoom call with me or let me fly out and stay at their house. And those conversations have changed my life forever.
Well, and that's the funny thing is that's what a lot of the people that we would talk to at the pool when you're in Hawaii said. They're like, well, the best part about this isn't any of the messages. It's actually the people that we get to connect with. I met this person three events ago and we talk every day now. Like they're there. We're here for the connection. The messages are fine. Tony Robbins' messages are great. The business ideas, that's awesome too. I pay $85,000 a year to continue to be around people that make me better. You know, it's a pretty profound reality for these people that are there to get better. And really at the end of the day, they just want exactly what you're saying.
We become who we spend our time with. You know, so if you see people who have what you want, whether it's the way they love their wife, they raise their family, the connections they have with people, and you don't feel like that's your story, then put yourself in a position to be around those people, even if it's scary. Because most of the time, those people, they either have been there themselves or they know people that have. And if they have a heart, which a lot of people do, they're willing to like pull you in. And I see that. And I just think that the fear of leaning into that for people is what keeps them out.
It is. I think, that relational fear of rejection, being rejected in the past, getting too personal too quick, sharing things, you know, there's all of those things I think freeze us and honestly rob us. They rob us of maybe some of the richest relationships that would be the answer to our most painful areas of life.
Totally. I was telling my wife, Fab, you'll dig this too. I was telling my wife, there was a text the other night. Someone was reaching out to us, trying to be a part of the group, who's a friend of ours, and just really vulnerable about the season he's in. You know who I'm talking about probably too. And I saw who was on this text thread, and I told my wife, I said, there would have been a season of my life where I would have been so insecure to be on a text thread with all these powerhouses of human beings. I said, but you know what's cool? I said, I know them. Like, I know the great parts, the dark parts, and they know me. And it's like, it's so incredible to have those relationships. It's so worth the risk to go after those relationships. It's transformative, man. It changes your life. So churches are a unique organism, right? Because you have people who come from all walks of life, are at various stages economically. And right now we live in a time, I mean, I'm sure there's definitely been other hard times, but there's so much going on in the world. There's a lot of fear out there. And so I think, you know, one of the things I always tell people when they ask me money problems is I really try to get into like, well, the mindset, because if getting out of debt and making money isn't going to solve the root, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So like getting really practical here. If someone was, let's say someone was burned out on church, or they had been hurt, they like the idea of church, they believe in God, but they've never actually put themselves in that position to have that kind of relationship we're talking about. What are some practical steps you would say to that person?
Well, I would even add, maybe they have, and they were hurt by those relationships.
Yeah.
Because that's something on there, a possibility too. Yeah, I would, a couple of things I would encourage people to do. Number one, in that setup, in that situation, is you want to disassociate people and God. Because a lot of times we're giving God credit for things people did.
Yeah.
Or we give the church, the capital C church, blame for something that an individual that they're probably just as hurt as we were. This idea that everybody in a pastoral position or in a leadership role in a church has it all together is really a flawed concept. I mean, the last perfect human went up to heaven 2,023 years ago.
Yep.
So we were guaranteed to have churches led by imperfect people. Now, that's not an excuse for pastors to go around hurting people or leaders, or, it's not a license to sin, but it's a license to forgive. And I think that when I realize the people that I've been led by are also humans, it actually empowers me a bit to forgive when it hurts.
Yep.
And so I think my first thing my first, I guess, tip or practical word of advice would be to learn how to practice forgiveness, because you look at Scripture, and for those that are Christians, it's one of the things Jesus instructs us to do, and actually says that his forgiveness hinges on it. And at the sake of going too vulnerable, I had a very poor relationship with my dad coming out of high school and college, and it culminated. I don't remember the year, but it was to the point where I had wrote him off, and I was never planning on talking to him again. I was very, very angry and felt very justified in my anger. And I had this moment one night when I was ranting to my wife about him, and I felt God speak to me. And I felt him say, "Cole, righteous men do what's right, not what they have the right to do." Because I felt very justified in why I was holding my unforgiveness. Yeah. And it hit me. I can be right all the way to being miserable for my entire life.
Yeah.
I can spend the next X number of decades fighting for my right, or I can choose to forgive him and move on from this. He still to this day has never apologized for the series of events that took place that really brought me to this boiling point. But once I decided to forgive him and let it go, my relationship with him completely changed. And now I actually have no problem forgiving people, really probably from anything. I can't think of something that would cause me to write somebody off in my life. Yeah. And that moment was probably the most powerful moment I've experienced, because it laid a bedrock for so many other relationships.
Yep.
And so I think a lot of times we're looking for the person to say sorry. We're looking for the church that wronged us to apologize. We're looking for the pastor to list out everything they did wrong and say, and you know what? You're probably 100% right. They probably did all of those things wrong.
Yep.
And I think we all have a choice of, hey, we can continue to hold on to this list with our fists closed.
Yep.
Or we can choose to be free.
It's
not going to be both.
Right.
And so for me, that choice of freedom that night, that was the most powerful relational choice I could have made.
Yeah. What did they say? When you're bitter and you have resentment, it's like you're drinking poison, trying to kill the other person.
Trying to kill them. Yeah. And it was true, and so that was a big moment. That was a big number one. I'll just give a second thing, to answer your question practically. Practice vulnerability. And so these are two phrases that we use at our church a lot: is practice forgiveness, meaning I'm not going to make forgiveness an event. I make forgiveness a daily practice of my life. I'm going to forgive as I go. And then I'm going to practice vulnerability. One of the things we do at our church is after we get done with music and worship, before we get into the message, we actually stop and everybody finds somebody they don't know. And we spend 5 to 7 minutes in a conversation with that one person. And we toss questions up on the screen. And then we encourage them, exchange numbers, exchange emails, actually go to coffee or lunch with this person in the next 7 days.
That's incredible.
And it's a big risk for people.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I imagine some people don't show up.
They hate it and they run. Right. And it's funny because I've got this guy, his name's Brian. He's been at the church for 15, 20 years. And he's telling me, he's telling me this, I don't know, this is maybe a month ago. He comes up to me and he's talking. He goes, "Hey, you know that stupid connection time that you always do on Sundays?" I'm like, "Yeah, I know about it. What of it?" And he goes, "I always try to avoid it. I stay out in the lobby until it's done. And I came back a little bit too early last week and I made eye contact with this young guy. Brian's in his 70s. And he goes, I made eye contact with this young guy. And so I started talking with him. I think this guy's in his 20s, a young business owner. And he goes, and so then next thing I know, we're exchanging numbers and we're going to lunch with each other. And they went to lunch together that week. This has been a month and a half now. They have had, with the couple, the young guy's married too, they have had 4 to 5 different meals together now since that point.
That's so incredible, man.
And both couples, when they talk about it will get teary-eyed about the value that they're getting from that relationship.
That's so beautiful.
But you have to practice vulnerability, right? Like it's vulnerable to say, "Hey, can I get your number? Let's get together." Like just that's vulnerable. And then it's almost like you're always having to intentionally make vulnerable risks. And there's different levels to it. It's vulnerable to ask for a number. It's vulnerable to show up for the coffee time. It can be vulnerable to not find a reason to cancel it and come up with something more important. It's vulnerable to ask for a second meal. It's like every step is a new layer of vulnerability. And so, I think if you practice forgiveness and you begin to practice vulnerability, you're going to find that you have richer relationships than a bank account could ever buy.
Yep. I agree, man. I'll end with just some stories for me on that. When I got sober, I was 20 years ago, drugs and alcohol, I hit rock bottom and I didn't know what to do. So I ended up asking a guy to help me and I ended up going through the 12 steps.
Yeah.
And, the 4th and 5th step, it's this moral inventory where you write down, everything, people you lied to, places you stole from. I mean, everything you can consciously remember. And there isn't a human being that goes through these steps that doesn't have like 3 or 4 things that you'd like to take to the grave. Yeah. Whatever they are.
Absolutely.
Right. But I was in this group that was said, those are the things that will put you in your grave early.
Yeah, it's good, man.
So if you're going to do this, start with those. And I remember thinking to myself, I had so much shame around some of this stuff. I thought to myself, I was like, man, like if I tell him these things and he ends up for some reason reacting to it, that's fine. At least I did what I was supposed to do and I'll find someone else to take me the rest of the way.
Wow.
Of course he laughed and it was, whatever. It's not about what we do. It's about the reasons why behind we do it, right? You can't just change your behavior. You got to get to the root of it. But that whole resentment thing, man, for people that are addictive, it's the number one things that makes you drink again or go back to drugs is bitterness. Number one. Yeah. And we have to get rid of it and forgive at all costs. If you're someone who has a history of addictive behavior, the difference between people that are in the recovery rooms and maybe someone else is the sense of desperation and the fear of going back to that old life. Yep. And which ends up being a gift, right? Because you got to stay free of bitterness at all costs.
It's true.
And one of the things they teach you in the steps that is so useful, I've used it with so many of my friends who don't even have a problem with drinking, is they teach you is like, if something is 99% someone else's fault, like maybe your dad, for example, you were a child, you did not actually provoke it. Much of the time I had a part, but if it's 99% someone else's fault, the solution is trying to find the 1% you can own.
Absolutely.
And it could be as simple as saying, my dad, because I have a similar story, was a spiritually sick man, and I want to give him the same grace I would for someone that's in the hospital. He did not know how to take care of me. He did not. He was coming from a generation of brokenness. And it's like, once you flip it like that and you start looking at the people around you, you're just like, how could I be angry at somebody who did not know any other way?
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah.
So
that perspective is huge. Man. Yeah.
Well, dude, thank you for being here, bro.
Yeah, man.
I appreciate you.
Thanks for having me. I love it. And I love you.
I love you too.